All right, stand by. 10 seconds.
Camera one.
Talent.
Ready, camera two.
And cue
2,
talent.
1.
Roll for record.
Greetings and thanks so much for joining us. This is The Rundown, where we run down some of the big stories making news. I'm your host, John Phillips. Joining us from Dallas, Texas is our pal, PJTV contributor Scott Ott, and right here in the city of Los Angeles, stand-up comic Stephen Cruiser. Now it's time to go to the top of the rundown. And we're starting in the state of Texas. Scott Ott, take it away.
The top of my rundown, Champagne Chris Christie gets the hypocrite smackdown from the New York Times. The Times actually tries to take down the man that it built up as the potential Republican presidential candidate. They haven't been so excited about a guy since Maverick McCain. The paper actually goes in a rather in-depth story and chronicles Chris Christie's living the high life, not only on the taxpayer dime, but on gifts that he's received from well-connected, well-heeled friends like Sheldon Adelson and actually the lately late Saudi king Abdullah. So the question is, should Republicans jettison hypocrites who talk fast but then sit down to feast on the benefits of their power? Or should we be more upset with the New York Times and maybe remind them that the charge of hypocrisy only sticks when people have principles?
First of all, I don't necessarily know if I believe that he's consuming these fine dining items. He looks like the type of guy that orders his dinner through the clown's nose at Jack in the Box.
Yeah,
and I stand by that.
He's Funyuns and pork rinds. That's what he's, yeah. No, here's the thing. While you're thinking of your next, this is a template that we've seen time and again with moderate, media-loving Republicans and the New York Times. They build them up, they build them up, they build them up, and when they no longer need them, then they do this. And generally, when they no longer need them is when it comes to the general election. In this case now, Christie's big sin is that he's not going to be as awful as Jeb Bush. So Jeb Bush is the one they're in love with now. Jeb Bush is the front runner. Jeb Bush is everything, and they're turning on Christie already. They've done it time and again. This is what happened with McCain, where he courts them and they're very nice to him throughout the primary, and then they're vicious to him. They savage him as soon as the general election rolls around. And it's their fault for not noticing it. It's each individual candidate's fault for playing the game and getting sucked into it.
Let me defend Chris Christie here for a second, because they're accusing him of taking wine and other items. Why is that an issue that warrants intense coverage in the New York Times when they're not asking the question, how is Harry Reid a millionaire? Harry Reid has worked in government his entire life, and he now has a net worth in the 7 or 8 figures. How does that happen? How about all these other Democrats that have been sitting in Washington, D.C. for years and years and years, having worked for no one but the government? They're millionaires. How do they accumulate that kind of wealth? I'm not worried about the champagne. I'm not worried about the wine. But how about those millions of dollars? What did they have to sell? What influence did they have to give to get that money? And how did that money get in their bank accounts? That's what I want to know.
Well, it's never legit with them. Why was it news when Chris Christie supposedly closed down a bridge, but it wasn't news when any of the protesters closed down bridges and people weren't getting to hospitals? You know, back in, the day that the New York Times found out about John Edwards' legitimate affair, they ran a story about a McCain affair that never happened. I mean, they knew, and they had confirmed sources on the Edwards thing. The stuff they go after the Republicans with is rarely ever legit, but they go after them anyway. And in the modern media era, you throw it at them for a few days, and it tends to stick whether it's true or not, a la Sarah Palin saying she can see Russia from her house.
And the case can be made, Stephen, that the reason why they go after Republicans on stuff like this is not only that Republicans claim to have values, but that Republicans actually have values. And a charge of hypocrisy doesn't stick against somebody who doesn't have values. The problem with Christie, they're saying, is he portrays himself as a cheesesteak on the boardwalk kind of guy. Meanwhile, privately, he's telling people that while he's in office, he wants to squeeze all the juice out of the orange, to use terms that he's quoted as saying.
But this is small potatoes, though. You're not going to give up influence for a bottle of champagne. You will do it for millions of dollars, which is what's been going on in Washington, D.C. for years and years and years. And I think if you're a newspaper that prides yourself on keeping a watchful eye on government, that's the bigger issue, not a couple of bottles of booze.
So you're not talking about the New York Times anymore then? Okay.
No.
Okay, gotcha. You shifted there. If you're a newspaper that prides itself on keeping a watchful eye on government, please, this is the daily publication of the Democratic National Committee.
All right, Cruiser, what do you have for us?
Top of my rundown, a baby too young to be vaccinated contracts measles and forces a Southern California daycare to close. This happened inside Santa Monica High School. The daycare there is for children of students and staff members, and it's not clear where or how the toddler contracted measles. Staff have not yet said when the facility will reopen. 13 infants who are at the daycare have been quarantined for 21 days as a precaution. Nearly 12% of children at Santa Monica schools have not been vaccinated because their parents opted out. The measles outbreak started at Disneyland back in December, and it has spread to 7 other states in Mexico. More than 100 cases have been confirmed in California. Now, John, in recent weeks, I've seen any number of articles or social media proclamations from people on both sides of the aisle saying, what are you worried about if your kids are vaccinated or if you're vaccinated? Well, the thing to worry about is the kids don't get the vaccination until they're 12 months old at least. So you've got babies out there. So the problem is that the actual science here doesn't favor anyone with a newborn at the moment because they either have to stay home or the other people have to stay home. Is this enough reason for it to be more a government mandate?
Well, this is why everyone should be vaccinated. If everyone was vaccinated, then that baby wouldn't have the measles. But the problem is Santa Monica has a very low rate of vaccination. It's comparable to the sub-Saharan African country of Chad. That's how bad it is in Santa Monica. In Humboldt County in Northern California, the same thing. I have a friend who works in this particular industry in Orange County, and he was saying, because a lot of people were calling into my radio show saying it's the illegal aliens that are doing it, he said, au contraire, that Santa Ana, which is a city with the most immigrants in Orange County, or the highest concentration of them, has one of the highest vaccination rates because the shots are free. But you go down to Laguna Niguel, which is an affluent white area, and the rates are much, much, much lower, comparable, again, to some of these sub-Saharan African countries. And this is just a case where the mommy bloggers have run amok, and they have bad science. They don't understand what they're talking about. You have people who know nothing speaking to people who know less, and there are real-world consequences to not accepting science.
Yeah, the highest concentration of unvaccinated kids are in affluent Southern California liberal enclaves.
Yes.
There's a clip on The Daily Show you should go see. I posted on the PJ Tatler with this woman in Marin County saying, well, we're thoughtful here and we're liberal, and that's her excuse for not vaccinating. There was not science. We're thoughtful and we're liberal. Well, good for you, yoga mat. Scott, now this is already turning into a thing for the press to go after the Republicans with, because the press will go with a, hey, you're against government, aren't you? You're against government. What do you think the government should do about this? Which candidate do you think, who's mentioned as a potential right now, will be the best at articulating, we're not against all government, we're against egregious government overreach, but who do you think can explain this the best?
I don't think anybody's going to be able to explain this. Frankly, this is the fake rape story of, the legitimate rape story of our era. The last cycle we had, they were trying to trip people up with the question that took down the Missouri lawmaker. I think that somebody needs to have the guts to stand up and say, look, I'm all for individual liberty and freedom. I don't think the government should force you to have to put any kind of chemicals in your body you don't want to put in your body. However, if you decide that you don't want your child or yourself to be immunized against a communicable disease that could affect hundreds, if not thousands of people, that's fine. You're free to do that, and you'll be living in the measles colony that's out in the desert.
Right next to the leper colony. It goes back to the hippie cages I said we should build last week. But I don't know. I don't like to disagree with Scott, but I don't think that this is the fake rape story. I think this is more of the banning contraception story of this cycle. And you need someone to just reject the premise. You need someone to say, no, that's not what we believe. No, that's not what we're thinking. No, nobody's talking about that.
You know what else drives me crazy about this story is that you'll read an article about it and you'll have some doctor from the Mayo Clinic say one thing. Somebody that has studied this, familiar with the literature, and has been working in the industry their entire life. They say vaccines work. And then you got Jenny McCarthy right below him saying, well, I don't think that they work. And they're given equal stature. And not every story involves two people that have a disagreement that are both legitimate. Sometimes it's right, somebody's right and somebody's wrong. And we have to be clear about that these people who are conspiracy theorists, who don't believe that vaccines work, they're wrong. The science has proven them wrong.
This happened at my daughter's high school, so we were talking about it yesterday as I was bringing her to school, and I said, well, you know, 13 of these kids have to be vaccinated. I have to be quarantined for 3 weeks now. There's an economic impact now. These families may not have the money or the backup to find someone to watch the kids for 3 weeks, so they may have to take vacation days now. They may have to just take unpaid vacation, highly unlikely with a teacher, I know, but they may have to take unpaid vacation. But these are now this is greatly impacting the lives of several families because some hippie wanted to believe Jenny McCarthy. And my daughter at least got that. She's worried about some of her teachers not being at school now because they have newborn infants and they just came back. So I mandate the crap out of this, okay? Scott's right, build the colony out in the ocean with the hippie cages. I don't think they should roam freely on their own island.
All right, moving on to the top of my rundown. This is going to be a surprise for many of you. A shocker, someone in the rap industry is in trouble with the law. Did you hear Steven Cruiser's gasp? Suge Knight has pled not guilty to murder and attempted murder charges. Former rap mogul was in court this week after he allegedly ran over 2 people, including one of his friends. He actually killed him. Knight says he feared for his life when the incident happened last week. He also pled not guilty to 2 counts of hit and run. The judge ruled Knight must remain in custody without bail. And I'll tell you what, the rap culture is a culture that breeds problems on itself. We know about the lyrics. We know about the famous cop killer song that was going on. Death Row Records is the name of the company. Suge Knight has had many run-ins with the law. Is anyone on the planet surprised?
I was surprised that Suge Knight was still alive. I was there. I had a gig in Vegas. I was about a mile away when the night Tupac got shot a long time ago. Suge, you know, peripherally involved in that. And this was so no. I was actually surprised he made it because, you know, the whole thing with a lot of the rap culture is establishing some street cred, and that involves getting killed or getting sent to a penitentiary, not to jail, to a penitentiary. You need to do some real time in there. But one of the greatest things that happened in this incident, I've got to tell you, and I forgot to tell you this earlier last week. This happened at Tam's Burgers in Compton.
Yes.
And almost within like 4 hours, somebody had gone on Yelp and created a Suge Knight account and did a Yelp review of Tam's Burgers, recounting this entire story. And he only gave it 3 stars, and he explains that why at the end. And I was dying. It was one of the funniest things I've read in here, explaining the whole thing. They challenged him to a breakdancing competition, and even though he's fat, he had to do it because he couldn't lose face, blah, blah, blah. And then he ran him out. It was brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
All right, Scott, I want you to put on your best Leo Terrell fair-minded civil rights defense attorney hat and explain to me. Imagine I'm a prospective juror. I'm sitting in a courtroom in Compton, and as the defense attorney for Suge Knight, you have to explain to me how he accidentally ran 3 people over twice because he threw it in reverse and did it a second time.
Well, you know, I'm sure the automaker is liable in this situation because you know how those car makers are always making vehicles that do things unexpectedly, surging forward, lurching backward, you know, have ignition problems. So I'm sure that there's going to be a class action lawsuit here. You know, I don't know why people are so hard on the rap music industry. These are just artists that are trying to get their muse out there to share the love and peace and joy with the world. You know, if this were bluegrass, I don't think we'd be hearing the same kind of thing, even though, as we know, those guys who play that hammer dulcimer can get pretty nasty at times.
Well, I don't know. Didn't Johnny Cash shoot a man in Reno just to watch him die?
That's right. That's right.
You write a decent song about it at work. Plus, it's Reno. Have you been there? Come on.
All right, that's going to do it for today's show. All right, now we're asking you, the PJTV audience, in the comments section, explain to me how you accidentally run 3 people over twice. I'd love to hear that. I'm John Phillips. For Steven Cruiser joining me here in Los Angeles and Scott Ott in Dallas, Texas, thanks so much for watching The Rundown.